Hey, this is Lee Balcom, and you may have noticed a little bit of a pattern where something happens in a coaching session and I come and make a video about it because that's why we're here today. And what I've noticed is sometimes something will happen that's kind of on repeat. And I realize if it repeats with client after client, you probably need to be warned about it because you may be stepping into the exact same trap, which is holding you back from getting exactly where you want to be. So today I want to talk about 5 different things I hear people say where when they say them, they create some bigger issues in their relationship. And I'm going to tell you what they say and what you might be saying and why that ends up getting in the way. Okay, so let's get started. I don't want to spend a lot of time with this. You need the information and you need to then get back to your efforts to save your marriage. So first of all, one big thing that I hear people say all the time that really creates more problems even though people think they're trying to solve a problem, and that is this phrase: I've changed, or I'm gonna change. Makes sense, right? I mean, if your spouse is saying, this is what's not working in the relationship, and maybe you've even realized it, and you've said, I've got to change this thing, and you've worked on making the change. So this is true whether you have changed or just intend on changing, or you have a plan to change. It doesn't mean anything. So I'm not saying you shouldn't change. In fact, I say exactly that in my system. It's my second C. Change yourself, right? So I am all about how you need to grow and change. That's part of my biggest thing that I've talked about and written about is how to thrive in life, and that requires something different than what you've been doing. That's also true in a relationship. Part of the reason your relationship is stuck, part of the reason is because you're stuck. Now, here's the problem with that phrase. You're announcing to the world, or in this case, to your spouse, that you've changed or that you're going to change. And here's the problem. You're creating an expectation, not that you've changed, but to prove that you haven't, right? You're creating a scenario where your spouse is now going to try to find the places where you haven't changed to prove that you haven't changed, because that justifies what they think about the relationship. And so if they're thinking nothing can change here, the relationship is in trouble, and even if they've told you what it is, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute, and you make the change, don't announce it. So what do? Don't talk about the change. Be the change. Just be the change. Be that consistently. Because what you're trying to do is prove over and over that you've made the change. Now, if you've seen my video just a couple of videos back about the fact that this isn't about doing a 180 U-turn. It's certainly not doing the 360, which sends you in the exact same direction. This is about finding a different path that is better, more helpful, more healthy for you. So you want to do that. You want to make sure that you're making the changes you need to because you know you need to get to a different place. Just don't proclaim the change. Be the change. Live it out in your life. That is the number one thing that I hear people say that hangs it up for them, that gets them in trouble. And it's very simple to avoid. Just be the change that you need to make. Be that change. Okay, so that's number one and a big one. Number 2, don't ask the question, why don't you love me? I mean, it makes sense, right, to kind of ask that question, why don't you love me? But it doesn't to your spouse. And it doesn't psychologically. Because what happens is they're going to sit there and name off all the reasons trying to prove to you why they don't love you. And by the way, I'm not really convinced it's about not loving you. It's about not being connected with you. Another video about why marriages get into trouble, I talk about connection. And after that, I even talk about the specifics of what connection is about. That's the major problem with your relationship. Hit the pause button. That's the major problem. But what you're doing here is getting them to give you the information. There's a law, a rule in being an attorney that when you're in court, you don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Because part of what comes out of that are things that suddenly spin out of your control. And this is one of those things. You may have some ideas of what's happened in your relationship. I've already given you a lot of those. So if you're watching my videos, you certainly do not need to be asking this question. What you're creating, you're trying to find a way of maneuvering around and convincing them that they love you. I mean, I get that. That makes sense. Except for what you're actually doing is getting them to dig in deeper. The kind of the best answer that you might get out of that is, I don't know, I just don't love you. The worst that can happen is they start elaborating more and more and more and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper on why they don't feel love. And all they're doing is locking it down. They're convincing themselves while they're convincing you. So you don't want to create that scenario. It's not like you can't figure out some of the pieces of the puzzle, because I've given you the puzzle pieces to put together so you can understand how that works. No need to ask the question. All you're going to get is the response that is more convincing to them of what's going on. So number 3 question you don't want, or number 3 thing you don't want to say is, what did I do? Very similar to why don't you love me? What did I do? Let me start by saying that what's happened in your relationship is a relational issue. How did we miss the boat? How did we get into trouble? That's an interesting conversation. What did I do? Set you up as you are the one that's made the mistake of everything being apart. It takes 2 people to hit that pause button. And if there is something specific that you have done that has caused damage, you already know it. There's no reason to ask the question and once again to have them dig in and say here and here and here and here, because now what we've done is we've created a blame scenario. And after you're rolling that out, the blame scenario begins to gain momentum, just like that question, why do you not love me? What did I do? Sets up the same situation where they then begin to convince themselves of all the things that you did. No need for that. If you've got some things that you need to change, you likely know them. And if you don't, you might want to sit back and ponder that a bit, because that is for you to realize the places where you fell short. It's not for your spouse to say, here are the places you need to grow. You need to do that, because otherwise you're making them responsible for the changes that you need to make. That's your responsibility to figure out. Number 4 thing not to say, don't leave me. Because don't leave me really creates a scenario where they feel pressure. You may ask them to reconsider, absolutely. But don't leave me is a demanding pressure statement that is likely to backfire. The best that happens is a stick around. Probably not going to change the outcome of that. But the worst that happens is they now feel like you are trying to drag them into where they don't want to be. You have to allow them to make some choices in this, because the choices to come back into the relationship are going to matter down the road as you're working to save the relationship. And as you gain traction, you want them to be willing to come back into that, not forced to. That force that happens when people start trying to convince doesn't play well. So you don't have to say, don't leave me. There's a part of the process that's about for them to consider. And the 5th one, and this is often said in many different ways, is shame on you. And what you're doing is saying there's something wrong with them feeling bad and broken in the relationship. That's just how they feel. Shame on you never gets a good response. I mean, think back. Did you get shamed at any point in your life by a parent, a coach, a teacher, some important person in your life? Did it help you change? Or did it just cause you to defend yourself a bit more from that person? Shame on you, however it comes out. I thought you promised to love me. I thought you made a vow. All the things that are tempting to come out are all shame on yous. I can't believe you would do this to me. Shame on you. There are lots of ways you can say it. And so you just want to ask the question, am I in any way shaming them for how they're feeling? If you are, back away from that, because again, when people feel that somebody is shaming them, not when they feel some guilt or shame inside that causes them to move towards something different, but when they're feeling it imposed upon them, they're going to feel even more distant, more disconnected. Don't fall into these traps. What you are trying to do, okay, so those are the things you don't want to say. What are you trying to do? Invite your spouse back into connection. So connect with your spouse, first C. Change yourself. Become your better self, your best self you can do. Fix the things that you know of where you're frozen, of where you're stuck, of where you're hurt, right? And create a new path, one that you can create first, and then your spouse can join later, that moves you towards being a we. So 5 things not to do and how to start the process instead. If you need help with that, if you need help with figuring out how to move forward with that, please come visit me at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. And if you're stuck, check out those other videos on what connection is about, what's wrong with your marriage, and how to get started. This is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.